Hello, welcome to Legal Action. My name is David Siegel. I'm going to be joined by Jesse Barrientes today. We're going to be talking about Chapter 7 bankruptcy. As you know or may not have known, that bankruptcy laws were reformed on October 17th, 2005, and there's been much ado about it, and we're going to be discussing the ins and outs of the new Chapter 7 bankruptcy law. I'd like to introduce Jesse Barrientes at this time. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Tell me a little about yourself.
Well, I'm an attorney, cover multi-counties, general practitioner. Office is located in DuPage, in Wheaton.
Okay. Let's dive right into bankruptcy. Tell me a little bit about Chapter 7. What is Chapter 7 all about?
Well, Chapter 7 is primarily about, and it's really exciting, really, is for people to get a fresh start. You know, sometimes we all have things that happen in life. For example, you know, it might be a car accident, might be medical bills, it might be a divorce. It could be any number of 100 different things that could happen that kind of throw us off kilter financially.
Sure.
And so it's important to be able to give everybody an opportunity to have a fresh start, to be able to, to rebuild and get our financial house back in order. And that's the exciting news with the Chapter 7 is that it's available. It's available to most people to be able to do that, and in order to just wipe everything out and just start fresh again.
Well, there's been a big concern that it's not available. Is that true, or can a person still file for Chapter 7?
A person can still file for Chapter 7. There have been a few changes in the law, but Chapter 7 is very, very much alive. I suppose one of the differences is your average income. One person now, for one earner, has to make approximately about $41,000 a year to be able to be eligible for Chapter 7. If there are two people, husband and wife, then that goes up to $51,000. And if there are more, three or more, then that goes up to about $62,000 a year to be able to fit in to the category to do Chapter 7.
So if you're a wage earner and you're making above the state median income, you may not be eligible to get a complete fresh start, right?
That's true.
Okay, but there is another option for you?
There's an option. There's always a Chapter 13, which is a partial repayment plan. And the basic bottom line is that it's debt relief. It's available to each and every one of us. And when you're in that situation, you need to take advantage of all of your options.
Okay. How often can somebody file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy relief and get a fresh start?
Well, under the old law, it was 6 years and a day. Okay, they've changed that just a little bit, and now they've added a couple years, so now it's 8 years and a day. The primary purpose for doing that is to prevent bankruptcy fraud, to prevent somebody from racking up a whole bunch of bills and just kind of hanging on for that period of time and just doing it all over again and again and again.
Was there really a lot of fraud happening, or is this much ado about nothing?
Well, I don't suppose there was a bunch of fraud. They're just trying to tighten things up to make it more difficult so that creditors that can be paid under certain situations will be paid. And that seems to me primarily to be what the new bankruptcy law is about getting creditors paid.
But this is almost 8 years in the making. I mean, this has passed the House, it's passed the Senate, it made it all the way to former President Clinton's desk, and he vetoed it. They continue to try it. Who's been pushing this new law?
Well, it's the creditors have been pushing it because they want to get paid. Whenever somebody files a Chapter 7, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, they get discharged. You don't have to pay those credit cards, that debt back. And as a result, who's losing is the credit card companies. But they're also the same ones that are sending credit cards to people that probably shouldn't have them.
Yeah, in reality, the credit card industry, the profits have increased every year, while at the same time they've been fighting for reform. So aren't they really trying to have it both ways and profit even more? Well,
it seems that they did get it a little bit both ways with the passage of the new law, and they were primarily responsible for lobbying to get this law for this time. And it seems like they've achieved that goal.
One of the leading companies in bankruptcy software is Best Case Bankruptcy, that's originally from Evanston, right here in Illinois. And they did a study based on the numbers that they have as to how many people who filed under the old law would be eligible to file under the current law. Are you familiar with any of those statistics?
I sure am, and the statistics, the percentage that they're talking about is 85% of the people that would have been eligible under the old law okay, are eligible under the new law. That's only 15%. That's not a whole lot. What that means for that 15% that that wouldn't be able to file, now under the new law, all that simply means is that they get shifted to another chapter, to a Chapter 13, so they have to pay something back. And that could be anywhere, really, from 10% to all the way up to 100% back, depending upon their specific situation. And that's why it's so very important for anybody who has, a question in their own circumstances to find a competent bankruptcy attorney to be able to advise them correctly.
Okay. What kind of new requirements or new hoops do debtors have to jump through to be eligible under the current law?
There are a few hoops that they have to jump through. The first we can talk about, I guess, are what they call payment advices. For Chapter 7, you have to provide your last year of your income taxes. All right, they're going to look at that and they're going to scrutinize it. Also, have to do 60 days of check stubs right before filing. So that allows the bankruptcy trustee to be able to see as fresh as, again, 60 days before it gets filed, what your income situation really is.
Okay, is this addressing possibly the fraud issue where someone might have the ability to repay their debt and they're really just looking for an easy way out and they're looking at the paycheck stubs to make sure that person falls below the state median income? Is that what that's all about?
They're definitely trying to tighten that up. Before, I mean, they checked before. It just wasn't, scrutinized as much as tightly as it is now. Now the onus is really on the bankruptcy attorney because that's the person they're going to be looking to, and that's why you need to go to a competent bankruptcy attorney because he's on the seat. He needs to know what he's doing to provide all of these documents to the trustee, because if those things aren't provided, the debtor is going to have a problem when they go in to try to get their discharge.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about credit counseling. That's a term that's been bandied about within bankruptcy, outside of bankruptcy. What in the world is credit counseling as it relates to a bankruptcy case?
Well, that's another one of the changes from the old law to the new law. And that's the old law didn't require anything like that. You could just file your petition, there'd be no problem, go through it, and that would be that. Under the new law, you're required to do actually 2 credit counseling sessions. The first is more like a briefing. It does talk about credit counseling a little bit too, but it also informs you of your rights and responsibilities and the rights under all of the different chapters. And that's something that you have to take before you actually file a bankruptcy petition. They want to make sure that you're advised and that you're informed of all those things. That typically costs about $50. It's available on the internet and available from a phone call, and that's something that you have to do. The other credit counseling class is a class that you have to take after you've already filed a petition, but before you get any type of discharge. And that typically is longer, it's more comprehensive. It's about a 2-hour class. That's available in person, and I believe also over the internet as well. Now, again, there's a fee for those things that's independent of anything that would be paid to bankruptcy attorney or anything like that.
Oh, it appears that a separate cottage industry has been developed with anybody who wants to file a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. That there's going to be $100 from what you're saying. That's going to be placed somewhere else with some other entity in order for you to qualify for your bankruptcy relief. Right?
That's absolutely right. But there are strict requirements for those credit counselors. I don't believe that anybody can just simply come out of the woodwork and hang a shingle up and be able to do that. You have to be approved, and there are many other requirements as well. But yeah, it is definitely a new industry, and the new bankruptcy law is also a little bit more expensive in that respect too, and in some other respects, and as much as they've also raised the filing fee just a little bit.
But the key factor that I'm getting out of this whole thing is that it does still exist. It's just going to be a little bit more difficult, and you must file your tax returns. I know there's people out there that just don't file, and that's going to be a condition precedent to being able to get that relief. Is that correct? Right,
and that's really going to help out Uncle Sam
yeah.
Because if you don't file your income tax, you're not going to be able to get a discharge of any kind. And so some people will continue to do what they've been doing, all right, but some people are going to do what they're supposed to do as citizens anyway, and that's
it almost seems
file
like
their income tax.
It almost seems like an end around enforcement of the IRS code by anybody who wants to get a fresh start.
Yeah, that's essentially what they're doing is skirting around a little bit, and I mean that's just one of those requirements to just kind of attack on and add on.
Very good.
I guess the bottom line, right, when you look at bankruptcy, is that it is very much alive and well.
Yes.
There's just a ton of relief out there for people, and relief that they really should be looking at rather than doing any other type of independent consolidation or anything like that. You know, there's also several misconceptions about bankruptcy that people think about all the time, you know, even before the law changed, but especially now too. One of those things is, you know, what happens if I file a bankruptcy, you know, do I get to keep my property?
Well, it depends on the property. If you're a homeowner or if you own a vehicle and you still owe money on it, you can continue to make the monthly payment. That's typically called reaffirming a debt. Now, there are some limits to what value of property you can keep free and clear from your creditors, but the majority of people in the state of Illinois will be able to keep their home and their vehicles, provided there's not significant equity. And equity is ownership, and that's something someone needs to determine the value of and consult with an attorney to find out exactly whether they'll be able to keep it or not. But typically, debtors do get to keep their home and their vehicles provided they continue to make payments. Overwhelmingly, that's the case.
In Illinois, they allow specific exemptions. Let's take, for example, a home.
Right. Let's go through exemptions, because that's kind of a tricky word.
Sure.
What is an exemption under the state of Illinois? What does that mean?
That's the amount of money that they allow you to deduct to have and still go through with your bankruptcy. People are familiar with homes. They're familiar with the term you mentioned earlier, which was equity. Suppose, okay, because you purchase it for a certain price, you make payments, and hopefully, over time, you're not just paying principal, and you build up a little bit of money. And depends upon what you do and how much that is. So let's say somebody has $15,000 worth of equity in their house, and they want to do a Chapter 7. Is that going to be available to them?
They can protect an individual up to $15,000, or if it's a married couple, you can combine that for $30,000. Now, basically, what that means, if the house is worth $200,000 and they owe $175,000 to pay it off, they're going to be protected. All they have to do is continue to make their regular monthly payment.
I think that's one of the important things, too. People don't realize that as well, that bankruptcy gives you a fresh start, but for those secured items like your house and your car, and things of that nature, you still have to pay the creditor back. If you want the car, you're going to have to make good on your original agreement with them. And the house, you're going to have to remain current, and you're going to have to pay anything that's in arrears or delinquent. Right?
That's correct. The true fresh start comes from eliminating medical bills, credit cards, personal loans, utilities, things like that, repossessed autos, and it stops the garnishments as well.
Well, what happens then about furniture and jewelry? Say I have a nice leather couch or a nice watch that I'd like to keep. Am I going to be able to keep those things and just my clothes, my suit?
It depends if those items are paid for or not. If they're not paid for, they're just treated the same way as the vehicle or the home. And if the debtor wants to keep those items, they need to continue to pay. If they're already paid for and they fall within a certain dollar amount, for example, you can protect up to $4,000 worth of personal property. So in that case, if you apply that $4,000 spread over your couch and over your watch and clothing and miscellaneous items, you'd be able to keep those free and clear while being able to eliminate all of the other debt that we mentioned.
You know, there's another misconception. It comes to my mind, too. And there's all this talk these days about privacy and everything else.
Right.
You know, people want to know whether or not, someone else is going to know that I filed a bankruptcy. Right. I mean, that's a common misconception. Can you shed a little light on that?
Well, nobody wants it advertised, that's for sure. You don't want it hanging from a banner, in a small airplane across the football stadium that so-and-so filed for bankruptcy. But in reality, unless you're a celebrity, like Burt Reynolds, or one of the other actors that filed for bankruptcy, nobody's going to know about it. It does get published, typically in the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin if you file in this Chicagoland area. It's a very small snippet. Someone would have to know where to look to find it, or they can go on the computer at the Federal Building and type in your name. And would show if you have filed for bankruptcy before. But the odds of someone doing that are slim and none. So really, your neighbor won't know, your job won't know, your friends won't know, unless you want them to know. Now, I will say this, though. The creditors, whoever you owe money to, is going to get a notice. So if you owe a friend or a family member, you're required by law to list those individuals, and they will receive a notice. They will find out. But hopefully they know you, they're aware of your situation, and they're accommodating to it.
Well, a lot of people also get a little upset when they think that perhaps their employer, their boss, is going to know that they filed a bankruptcy. Now, from what you said, generally that's not true, but are there circumstances where, where your employer would find out that you filed a bankruptcy?
Garnishments. And here's why. When you file a bankruptcy, the garnishment can be stopped as long as the employer receives a notice of the filing, which basically tells them, this person has filed for bankruptcy relief, do not deduct any more out of his wages. So in that case, the debtor wants the employer to know, indirectly, because that way they're going to get more money back in their paycheck.
And just so that people understand, a garnishment is a way for a creditor to enforce a civil judgment that they have against you for any variable amount of money.
That's right. There's also another twist on the garnishment issue. There's voluntary wage assignments that people sign when they take out payday loans, which are very common today. Those can be revoked in writing. So they're not necessarily enforceable. It's only a court-ordered garnishment. If someone receives a judgment, as you mentioned, that will continue unless there's a bankruptcy. But a payday loan, voluntary wage assignment, or a furniture purchase, this happens a lot in, those can be revoked in writing by the debtor just by stating in writing that they want to rescind that voluntary wage assignment. So it's very powerful. The consumer has more rights than they think in this regard.
Even without the bankruptcy?
Even without the bankruptcy. It's got to be a court order to garnish to be valid.
Oh, that's fantastic. A lot of good news. Actually, you bring up an interesting point, too, because payday loans are so very prevalent. And so that's something that would be able to, if you qualified for Chapter 7, to be able to be wiped out completely.
Yes.
Would it not?
Yes.
Now let me ask you, and this is something that I've come across a few times too, and people want to know, and it's also prevalent, and that's those are those title loans where you bring in your car title, and they give you cash. What happens with that situation? Does that mean that that gets discharged and they have to give me my car title back? I mean, say I borrowed $1,000 on my car and they have my title. What does the debtor do?
Well, that creates a security interest in the vehicle. So if you want to keep that vehicle, you need to continue to pay off that title loan. Otherwise, you're subject to the same rights, or you can be repossessed just like if Ford Motor Credit held the title. Just because it's Payday Loan Store that has your title loan, you have to pay that back if you want to keep the car. One exception to that, if you file a bankruptcy and you no longer want to keep the car, maybe it's not running, maybe it's not worth what you owe on the title loan, you can decide to surrender that vehicle and get out of the debt.
And that brings us actually to another misconception. We're talking about cars, and that's what people kind of worried about. People want to know what happens. When I file a bankruptcy, does that mean that I'm not going to be able to get any credit? I'm not going to be able to purchase a new car or a house or even get a credit card?
That's a great point. One of the things that amazes me is before someone has even received a discharge or gotten out of debt at all, they are worried about when they are going to get credit again, when they can get a car, when they can get a credit card. They might have $50,000 or more in debt, and they're worried already about when they can get credit. And that's part of the whole problem here with these lenders. The credit is available. Okay? Let's talk about an auto, for example.
Sure.
Once a bankruptcy case is filed, that does become public record. Auto finance companies know how to retrieve that record, and they will solicit to you. They will say, bring in your discharge paper. We'll get you in a car. We'll finance you. You'll be back on the road.
Now, why would they do something like that?
Well, for one, they know you can't file again for 8 years and a day. They're also going to hit you for a higher than normal interest rate. And two, they want your business. They want to carry that loan. Now, what I recommend to people that I counsel on bankruptcy is if you can wait 6 months to 2 years before you seek credit, you'll find that the interest rate has dropped considerably. And this is especially true with a car or a house. 2 years is the threshold that most mortgage lenders use to drop that rate to a more reasonable level. Now, it'll never be as good as if you never filed bankruptcy. However, if you can wait 2 years, the interest rate will fall to a more reasonable and affordable level.
But that's only assuming that the debtor keeps up his payments on whatever he's paying on, right? I mean, if he's late on some bills, that's going to affect that credit rate too, and that interest rate as well.
What you do after you file the bankruptcy is very important. If you get into the same bad habits of obtaining payday loans, of incurring medical expenses with no insurance, of getting involved in autos that you can't possibly afford that wind up getting repossessed and sold at a deficiency, all you're going to do is negatively impact your credit report beyond the fact that you already filed bankruptcy. So in other words, you're going to be a high risk in the future. So the trick is, be perfect if you can after you file the bankruptcy and remedy some of those problems that caused you to file in the first place. For example, if you didn't have health insurance and that was the main cause of your filing, look into getting it, either privately or through an employer. If you had an auto repossession on a vehicle that you just couldn't afford, think about what vehicle you're buying the second time around and what that monthly payment is. And also cut out anything that's not a necessity. Lottery, cigarettes, gambling, that stuff has to stop.
Just a matter of tightening up the belt.
Absolutely.
Now, let me ask you, you mentioned a little earlier that your credit's never going to be as good as if you'd never filed a bankruptcy.
I misspoke. It's not never.
Well, let me ask, how, and people ask that too, when does your credit, does that stay on my credit report forever?
It physically stays on the credit report for 10 years. However, before you think that you'll never get credit again, it's the same old deal. Within 6 months to 2 years, or even sooner, you're going to be targeted by lenders. Period. I've seen it happen over and over again. So the big fear that I'll never get credit again, first of all, you don't want it right after you file.
Sure.
You need to maybe go on a cash basis, maybe do a budget analysis and write down everything you spend. I know it's a little bit arduous, but it really shows what you're spending on, and you can prevent some of the stuff that you shouldn't be spending on unless you have the ability to live that kind of lifestyle.
Well, people also have this idea in their mind too, and this is from my experience, that, okay, maybe I owe only a little bit on this credit card. I owe a bunch of these other credit cards and maybe a car and some medical bills, some other things. But I still want to keep that credit card back. I don't want to file on this credit card because I may indeed need to do what you were saying that I shouldn't do again, which is to use that credit card and unfortunately go back in the cycle. Am I going to be able to keep that credit card and not report that when I do, because I'm going to pay them back when I file a bankruptcy?
That's a great question. It seems that everybody loves one credit card. They might have 10, they might have 20, they might have more. There's one that they want to keep as a safety valve, or they just like that company or the logo or whatever benefit they receive from the card. In reality, though, they must list all the people they owe money to, and the debt will be eliminated. So one example is when someone doesn't have a debt on a card. Let's call it a Discover card, by example. Even though there's no debt on the credit card, Discover is going to find out about the bankruptcy anyway.
How are they going to know that?
They subscribe to a database, typically, which indexes the Social Security number. And what they'll do is they'll terminate the charging privileges because they don't want to carry a client who has filed for a bankruptcy.
So I'm not going to be able, even if there's no balance on my credit card, okay, what you're saying is more than likely they're going to cut off my charging privileges.
Especially the major credit cards. That's what I have found. You are going to lose your charging privileges. There are some minor credit cards, small gas station cards, things like that, that for some reason do not want to terminate the credit card.
So those exceptions just depends upon each individual creditor.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But people should not think that that if they leave something off, that it's somehow going to survive and they're going to be able to continue to use it, because it just won't happen. They're going to lose it. They're going to get the letter in the mail, and they're going to go, darn.
You kind of brought something interesting to my mind, and that was, now what happens if I decide that I'm going to come in to see you and get a bankruptcy, but of course, okay, you know what, I really need to pay you. I have to pay rent, and I kind of like these tools from Sears, and this credit card is going to get discharged anyway, so I might as well tap it a little bit more. I might as well max it out because it's going to get discharged in any event. And then I come and see you. Is that something that's that I'm going to be able to do?
No, it's a big problem. In fact, it's fraud. It's incurring credit and running up a credit card knowing that you're going to be filing a bankruptcy and trying to eliminate it. And there are laws that will hold those purchases or charges due and owing even after the bankruptcy's filing. So it's never a good idea. Once you know that you are going to file and you have no intention of paying the creditor back, you should not use the card at all. Not for anything. Not a $20 gas purchase, not a restaurant. Cut it up. Be resigned to the fate that you've lost that card, you've lost your charging privileges. Whatever debt you owe right now is it. You're going to file bankruptcy, you're going to get a fresh start, and you'll worry about rebuilding your credit in the future.
You know, one of the other misconceptions that people have and people think about quite often is, okay, I'm going to come in, I've decided that I'm going to do a bankruptcy, I've looked at everything else, and really, this is my only option. So, are all of my debts going to be wiped out? You know, we talked a little earlier about whether or not I get to keep my property. Now, I guess sort of on the flip side of that is, well, you know, are all my debts going to be discharged? Am I not going to owe, you know, Uncle Bob or Aunt Sue, or am I not going to owe the IRS, or am I not going to owe the guy that you know that I ran my car into?
Right, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
It would.
No, but in reality, there are some debts that are not eliminated, and those are typically student loans, recent taxes, parking tickets, child support, alimony. Those debts stick around.
So if I get a parking ticket, or if I have a bunch of them, I can't.
Plan on paying it, because it's
no
not
way I
going to
can
be
get rid of it.
eliminated.
Oh, the
Even
government.
if it's in Chicago.
Yeah, it's
Okay?
especially
it's not
where
going to
we
be
get the boot.
eliminated. That's right.
Oh, you mentioned other things like maintenance or alimony. That's something that, or child support, right? That's something that I'm also going to have to pay, even if I'm a little bit behind.
Yeah, and that's correct. And you could see why people would just never pay child support and then file bankruptcy if it was something they can get rid of. So the obligation to pay a child or a former spouse by way of maintenance, alimony, support, or any court order for that matter that relates to that child or the spouse is going to be held due and owing.
Well, so I have a good question. How about your attorney? Can I bankrupt my debt to my attorney?
Well, most attorneys are going to require to be paid in full before they file your case.
Okay.
But if you run into a situation where someone will file for you before your case is filed, that's an issue that may be eliminated. I want to thank you for joining me today, Jesse.
Oh, great.
Appreciate
Thank you
it
very much, Dave.
Once again, Jesse Barrientes was my guest today. Thank you for watching. This has been Legal Action, and we'll see you next time. We'll talk about a different subject. Thank you very much. My name is Dave Siegel.